thank you very much for everyone for joining, and thank you for taking the time to join our webinar today. My name is Sophia, and I will be moderating the discussion today. Our webinar is about Netflix in the Nordics, and we will be looking at content trends and audience behavior for Netflix viewers from the Nordic regions. Now, if we go on to the next slide, you'll see the agenda. So we've got two great speakers today to talk about the Nordics viewing trends and Netflix. And we're going to start by giving a bit of an intro into Digitalize award-winning SVOD measurement system, which we call SODA, the SODA data. And it will be Ali Vahdati, our CEO and founder, who will be giving the intro to that. And after which, Matt Ross, SODA product manager, will be talking about Netflix trends in the Nordics from 2018 to 2021. We'll also be looking at the impact of the pandemic and how that affected viewing trends, as well as some more in detail content analysis, and ending with the future of SODA and how it can help us better understand the viewing revolution that's going on all around us. So what we will also have at the end is some time for questions. So just a bit of housekeeping before we start. If you have questions at any point during the webinar, then please use the Ask a Question feature, and me and my team will be monitoring those questions. At the end of the webinar, we will hopefully have about 15 minutes to cover as much as we can. But if we don't reach your question, don't worry, because we will be in contact at a later date to follow up. So without any further ado, I'd like to hand over to Ali Vahdati to give an intro to Digitalize.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Digitalize webinar. Thank you very much for the hundreds of people that are attending this. And I'm really proud as a CEO of the company to present an outstanding piece of work that we've done and the success we've had over the last couple of years. So what I wanted to do is I want you guys to understand a bit more about what Digitalize is about. I started Digitalize roughly 20 years ago, and my aim was I wanted to remove repetitive processes that researchers had to do and enable the researchers to actually do more proactive modeling, forecasting, add real value to businesses. And a lot of times people were really grounded down by cutting and pasting and really repetitive work. And by the time they reached the final product, they had little time to see how that could help their business. So through this period of time, we've been involved in a wide range of projects. We worked with Pact and Ofcom, helping the producers in the UK get better terms of trade, particularly on the new media rights, which in 2005 didn't seem that important, but now we're all sitting here and we see the big value of them. And we helped some broadcasters increase significantly their advertising revenue through better placement, through better optimization. And predominantly over the last 14 years, we've been one of the major providers of report and analysis based on TV viewing data to the UK broadcasting sector and wider afield to other companies that want to access UK data. The reason they've chosen us is because we give them the end product they need, rather than data they need to work on to get to the end product. But there was a big change in the market. Around 2016, we had clients who were asking us, what's happened to my young audience? Although the share was deceiving and TV channels maintained their share, behind that share is a total TV figure, and that was rapidly going down. At some points in that period, the average total TV figure was over 10 million across the day. And now we're getting days that is closer to 6.5 million in the UK. And even worse than that for broadcasters, it was mainly young viewers. And I remember a conversation I had with the director of research at ITV when we discussed how the size of the audience the total TV is lost of young people is equivalent to the whole population of the city of Sheffield. So it was substantial. And what we did then is we were thinking, how could we do this? We knew there were a lot of companies doing it through diaries. And personally, I thought, diaries was a thing of when I was born. So what we did was we innovated a methodology where we can pull people's viewing directly from their account. And we did that through hard work, lots of innovation. So what we do is we get 100% accurate viewing from people's account. It's all passive. No one has to do anything with regards to having to register things on a diary. And it's all to do with account viewing rather than households, because their accounts are the most important thing. So how did we do this? We launched this in 2019, by middle of the year. By the end of 2019, we had clients all over Europe, and we were in 5 different territories. Just to finish off, I'd like to tell you what my ambition is. I want Digital Eye to be the global #1 SVOD measurement service. We already have comprehensive coverage of all over Europe, and we'll be soon moving into Latin America, North America, and Pacific. So thank you very much for attending the session. I'll hand over to Matt, who is going to take you through our analysis and tell you more about SODA. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. So as Ali mentioned, I'm now going to start taking you through some of the analysis. So most of this data is going to focus on the Nordics, but we actually are including data across all of our regions. So we're including data across UK, France, Italy, Germany, and Spain as well, using that to compare and contrast with the Nordic data. So there's going to be a fair bit of data in here. We're going to be talking through trends, talking through content analysis, and looking at about how Nordic compares those other territories in terms of how it's grown for Netflix, and how it differs in terms of content performance as well. So that's going to be the main areas of focus for today. And I'll start off with looking at some trends. And the thing we're going to start off by looking at is just looking at subscriber penetration. So you can see in here, we've got subscriber estimates as a percentage of broadband subscription estimates for Q4 of 2021. And we can see that for Netflix Nordics in the light green, and the Netflix UK as a benchmark in the darker green. And we can see that Netflix Nordics is around 41% penetration at this point, which is obviously very large number, and it's the same level that UK was at around mid 2019. So there is potential room for growth there. And as another benchmark, we've added the estimate for Viaplay as well, showing that perhaps one of the reasons why Netflix hasn't got as much penetration might be the strong local alternatives that are provided in the Nordics. But we can see here that there is still headroom for that to grow, and hopefully in the next couple of charts will show you that seems to be the direction in which the viewing levels are traveling as well, in terms of people engaging more with the platform. So let's start with that. And we'll start with streams. So this is a graph showing total streams on Netflix in the Nordics by month from the beginning of 2018 through to the end of 2021. And what we can see here is a pretty steady increase over time with some ups and downs, and a level of seasonality. But predominantly, we're talking about growth. We're talking about an increase in viewing from 2018 through to 2021 that's been pretty sustained. There is a little red arrow here that you can see, because we wanted to highlight the fact that there was a dip around Q2 of 2021. There was a marked dip in performance on the platform where less streaming was occurring. And we're going to dig into that as we go further down into this presentation, as to why that is. And we're also going to dig down in the trends and see some of the other areas in which the viewing was, what was driving these streams down in terms of people's viewing habits as well. So generally speaking, pretty sustained growth for Netflix over this period in terms of total streaming on the platform. And that's also reflected in average consumption at an account level. So here we've got average daily minutes per account by month on Netflix in the Nordics, again, over the same period. And what we can see here is that on an average day in January of 2018, it was around an hour and a half per day per account. By the end of 2021, that was getting closer to 2 hours. But in fact, actually for 2018, you can see the averages for that first half at least was more around an hour to about an hour and 20 minutes, whereas in September of and October of 2021 we were getting to an hour and a half. So that is, to 2 hours. So that is, increases of nearly up to an hour a day on average from those two comparative periods. So what we're seeing here is genuinely, again, another, not just an increase in subscribers, not just an increase in streams, but also an increase in average engagement for users as well. So people are getting more and more out of it over time, and we can see that average usage and average time spent increase. And the same can be said of these two key areas as well. So on the left-hand side, we're looking at the same date range, but we're breaking it down by quarter this time, and the same for the chart on the right-hand side. And what we're looking at is average levels of daily reach on the left-hand side. So let's start there. And we can see here that for 2018 Q1, we're seeing an average of around 50%. And what that means is that on an average day, 50% of all subscribing accounts were watching Netflix. So on an average day, 50% would be coming in. And that then has since increased up to 60% here as well. We've added in a benchmark here for all of UK figs. And when I refer to UK figs, I mean, that is referring to UK, France, Italy, Germany, and Spain. So that is a combined UK figs average. And you can see here that over this period, there was actually a higher level for UK figs. And we're going to touch on that in our conversation around the impact of the pandemic as well. But as you can see, towards the end of 2021, this was leveling out with the performance of the Nordics. So it was coming down slightly for UK figs, but then increasing at the same time for the Nordics. So much that in fact in Q4, on average, there was over 60% of subscribers in the Nordics coming in, and that was lower in UK figs. So again, not just an increase in engagement, increase in the amount of people on each day that are coming back into the platform. And furthermore, this is also reflected in frequency. So what we're seeing on the right-hand side here is average number of sessions per day per account as well. By sessions, we essentially mean streams. So how many streams, individual streams that person is, that account is doing each day. And we look at Nordics again here, similar level to UK figs at 4 streams, just over 4 streams a day. That has since increased to around 5 streams a day, so an extra stream a day per account. And that again is slightly lower than the UK figs level. And again, we'll touch into where we think a lot of this acceleration and change between the two and the comparative nature of these two lines in the next section when we talk about the pandemic. But I think the key thing here is that what we're seeing is growth in all of these departments. We're seeing growth in total streaming, and that has been driven by growth in the average amount of time people are spending on there, the amount of people that are going in on an average daily basis, and also then, of course, the amount of streams they're doing. They're all combined, but it's all driving that viewing up. The lines are all going up, and I'm sure that those within Netflix that are looking at this data are confident that they're sort of going in the right direction in terms of performance for Netflix. And that's people are becoming more and more engaged with the content that's on the platform. So let's now move on to touching on the impact of the pandemic. And this is really an area where we're going to do a bit more of a comparative analysis between the Nordics and the UK figs territories, because there was a distinct difference that we observed between the patterns of performance on Netflix between those two. And I think we'll start off by looking at that streams chart again. So we'll go back to the original chart, but we've added in the other 5 territories now. So you can see each of those lines now over and above the streaming levels for the Nordics. But if we go back as far as 2018 here, we can see that what the differences wasn't quite as stark. There wasn't as big a significant difference between those other countries. Of course, UK here was the highest, but it was actually at a higher level than the likes of Italy and a similar level to those of France and Spain. And over time, that hasn't continued ultimately. So what we've seen on Nordic is a little bit more on the Nordics. It's a little bit more of a steady growth in terms of total streams over time, as opposed to an accelerated growth that we've seen across the other 5 territories. Now, there are probably a number of reasons for that, but one of the more significant ones would be the level of lockdown restrictions that were impacted on those nations. So obviously the 5 other nations that we're talking about had very strict lockdowns, and you can see quite clearly the impact of that here in the total levels of streaming, with these kick-ups for lockdown at the beginning of 2020. I think we've just about reached the 2-year anniversary. happy anniversary for anyone that's not that's coming from those countries. And the second of those for 2021 January, where we saw another sharp increase in viewing. And what we examined in these countries is that it was sustained to an extent. It didn't really come back down that significantly to pre-pandemic levels. It was sustained. So what you've seen with Netflix in those countries is acceleration and then kind of sustaining of that growth. Whereas the Nordics, it's been a lot more steady. And if we then look at it for the average minutes per day per account analysis as well, you can see it here as well. So again, in the first of those lockdown eras where we've got around Q1 to Q2 of 2020, you can see that in Spain and Italy, these two green lines here, you can see that actually there was over double the amount of minutes being spent in Nordics. So there was about 100 minutes on average being for Nordics, but about 250 minutes per day being spent for Spain and Italy. So a real big kick up for those countries that just wasn't experienced in the Nordics. So a lot more steady and slow progress and growth nonetheless, but slower and steadier and not as impacted and accelerated by the pandemic as the other territories that we have in this chart here as well. And again, you can see it here for this one. The key thing here again, though, is if we look at 2021 December, you can see these numbers are actually coming back a bit more level, a bit more close together. So we're starting to see that squeeze where the Nordics levels are up again, closer to those on the other territories. So whilst those others are kind of in a post-pandemic flattening or perhaps even slightly coming down, the Nordics growth is still increasing in terms of engagement on the platform. And that's beginning to bring it much more in line with those other European territories in terms of average time spent per day. So those are tackling some of the really key trends that we've seen in the data. And we're going to continue that, but focus the trends a little bit more on content now. So again, we're looking at longer term data here, but focusing it on overall content trends. And we've just got some of the really key stuff that's come out of this analysis, and we think is perhaps some of the most interesting and insightful breakdowns that we were able to get from looking at content trends over time. So the first of those is a breakdown of what we call Netflix title classification. So by title classification, we mean, is that show something that's acquired? Is it something that is a Netflix original? And then we've also got some subcategories like Netflix exclusive and Netflix co-production as well. And we've broken these down by quarter again. And you can see here that what we're doing is we're looking at proportion of viewer minutes by those classifications from 2018 through to 2021 in the Nordics. So you can see here that one of the key things here is to see this blue bar here of acquired and see how this is the proportion of the viewing here is decreasing over time. So you can see from around 60% where we're hitting here in 2018 Q1, this is reduced right down to 40% in 2021 Q4. So there has been a sustained decline in the amount of time that is being spent on acquired content versus original exclusive content as well. It flattened out over here, but again, in 2021, we're starting to see it become less important. And I think from a Netflix perspective, that's going to be a promising sign that whilst engagement and growth in streaming is increasing, the reliance on acquired content is decreasing. And I think that is the balance that they want to be seeing as more new entrants into the market, like big streamers come into the market, perhaps take back some of the content that was contributing to these higher percentages. And that'll be, and it's going to, with that breakdown and with that increased fragmentation in the streaming market, they're going to want to see the Netflix original content and the exclusive content delivering more for them. So these are trends that are driven by them putting out more and more of that content. But it's important to note that whilst these trends are happening, engagement is also increasing in the Nordics. The second trend that we observed was around English language content. Now, this is something that we will touch on a little bit throughout the content analysis, but you can see here, what we've got here is we've got the percentage of total streams on the platform from 2018 through to 2021 that is contributed by English language content. So Nordics, there is the blue line with the white dots. And you can see here that just behind the UK, which is the purple line, it is, has the second highest percentage of English language content. So it's taking up more of a percentage of streams. It's of more importance to Netflix in the Nordics than it is in Germany, Spain, France, and Italy, for example. So it's almost kind of ranking second essentially in terms of in terms of how important that English language content is. The other thing to note of is the fact that that is actually decreasing. So we can see here that it was close to 95% at the beginning of 2018. That is now, about 90%. It's dropped 85, 90%. So that has dropped again. And so what we're observing again is that whilst it remains important and comparatively important to other European territories, it is decreasing. So the reliance on it is decreasing. And we are going to be touching today on some of the local produced content that Netflix have been releasing. So content from Sweden, from Denmark, in particular, in more detail. And again, these types of content, locally produced content, are big drivers of these trends that we see here. So that's a really important factor, that this is decreasing. But it's also key. It's also really interesting, insightful to understand that English language content is a strong performer in the Nordics. And we're going to touch on that, as we go through this as well. The final of those is slightly similar, but a slightly different twist on that, which is US content only. So we're now stripping out, we're looking at English language, but we are stripping out content that wasn't made in the US and looking at the importance of that. So it's the same chart, but looking at US made content. And as you can see, that the Nordic line has essentially jumped up right to the top here. So it's the most important in the Nordics. It's less important in the other territories, and that's including the UK. So back here where it's over 80% of all streaming to US content, that's between 75 and 80% for the UK. Again, declining over time. So we can see with all of these charts, there is a decline in the reliance of US content. There's a decline in the reliance of English language content, and that is across the board. However, it's still, this is the type of content that's still very important in comparison to the Nordic countries. Content from the US, English language content, still performs very well. So now we're going to do a bit more of a focused content analysis, where we're looking at content performance in 2021. So this is a more detailed performance analysis of content and how it's performed within the year of 2021. So less kind of trend analysis, more into what's happening in that final year, as we've seen the amount of reliance on US content, English language content decrease. What happened in that final year? What is the more current state of play in terms of how content is performing on the platform? So let's start off with a top 30. So what we're looking at here with a top 30 is the top 30 performers in terms of reach percentage. So by reach percentage, we are looking at the percentage of total subscribers that watched at least one of those episodes of a series or the movie that we're looking at here. So when we look at this top left-hand figure here, 79%, we can say 80% for shorthand, is that Squid Game was watched by 80% of Netflix subscribers in the Nordics. Now these are Squid Game here. These numbers you can see here on this top level are quite unusual for for a show. It's not something that you would ordinarily see. We know the phenomenon that was Squid Game in terms of its global reach and the amount of people that were talking about it. And so it's not necessarily surprising to see huge numbers for Squid Game, but the reaching 80%, close to 90% of viewers in Spain that are going off and trying it. The same for Italy. These numbers are things that we haven't observed in the data. So Squid Game is a little bit of an anomaly at the top there. Under that, you can see that these kind of numbers would be more. We would expect to see around 50, 60% for a very strong performer, into the 40s, 30s for again a strong performer, but perhaps not quite as strong as these real top hard-hitting shows that perform the best. The next couple of things that are really interesting from here are three particular shows that we've highlighted here. We've got The Chestnut Man, Snabbercash, and Young Royals. Young Royals and Snabbercash being from Sweden, The Chestnut Man from Denmark. And these shows are ones that have made this top 30 and perform very well in the Nordics. They're the locally produced content, but they perform much better in the Nordics than they do in some of the other European territories. Not so much the case for The Chestnut Man. As you can see here in Spain, 44.5% of Spanish accounts have watched at least one episode of The Chestnut Man. So again, that's a pretty strong performance, and the same thing can be said for Italy. Germany and France, not quite so much, and UK the lowest. And what we generally tend to see is that with non English language content in the UK. We could see how important that was in one of our previous slides. It doesn't do quite as well. And you can see that again for Snabbercash, only getting 3%. You can see it for Run Royals, only getting 5% of viewers. So it's an area that I don't think Netflix really consider to be a strong performer in the UK. Of course, you could point me directly to the 70.8% here of Squid Game that watched the Netflix. So again, a bit of an anomaly in this trend. But generally speaking, it's more difficult for these locally produced pieces of content not in English languages to perform well in the UK. But still, as you can see in the Nordic countries, for Chestnut Man, Snabbercash, Young Royals, very strong performances. But again, that's what we tend to see with local content. Performs the best in its local area, and then picks up viewing at a lower level in the other territories. I've also highlighted Superstore and The Office here because I think these are two quite interesting ones to also look at. And these are ones that fall into a slightly different category for a Netflix show. They are obviously acquired pieces of content, and also they are pieces of content with vast number of episodes. So we would perhaps put them under the bingeable heading. So there's shows that you could watch, 50, 100 episodes of, and you could spend quite a lot of time viewing them. And again, performed in the top 30 for 2021 for the Nordics. Again, not as well in Germany, Spain, and France and Italy, but actually very comparative numbers across UK. So for The Office, UK slightly lower, 26%, but for Superstore slightly higher at 39%. So again, these are similar types of shows that they're short form, they're comedy, that they've got a high number of episodes, and they tend to do better in UK and Nordics than the other territories. And I think what we're starting to see here is a picture emerging where there are more similarities between content performance in the UK and Nordics than there are with the other European territories, and then there are more similarities among the other European territories than there are in the UK and Nordics. And that's something that we're going to pick up on in a couple of slides time, but you can already see that emerging, that there's more, there seems to be more correlation, there seems to be more similarity between the way a piece of content performs in the Nordics to the UK than the other territories as well. And just to look at those slightly different ways. So what we've done with these ones, we've taken those same 30 titles, we've split them into series here on the left-hand side and to movies here on the right-hand side. And what we've got here is that we have got two different metrics. On the left-hand side, we've got series completion rate. On the right-hand side, we've got the view-through rate for the movies. And what this is telling us is that when somebody watched Lupin Series 2, for example, when they watch one episode, they tend to watch about 91% of the series. So when they start watching it, they get about 91% the way through. The Witcher at the bottom here, when somebody's watching it, they're only getting around halfway through. And The Witcher is an interesting example here because it's the older series of The Witcher, so the one that wasn't released in 2021. So we tend to see older series that are perhaps being rewatched by an episode or two if a new series is coming out, that they will be dragging that average series completion rate down. We also tend to see that series 2 and series 3, so not the first series, tend to have high series completion rate, as you would expect, because people have already watched one series of it. They're already engaged in the piece of content. So when they go to watch the second series, they're then more likely to watch all the way through. So we can see that that is, a clear pattern that's emerging. And again, for the first series, it becomes really interesting because we can see for Squid Game, clearly a high quality piece of content, people being very, very interested in it, watching it all the way through. And for Chestnut Man, similar thing, really high engagement on the show there. So really good. And this is a really good measure of the quality of a piece of program in terms of bringing people through. How much did people essentially stick with it? How long did they stick with the show? Did they give up halfway, or did they stick with it? And I think this is definitely the type of things that they'll be looking at Netflix internally to help them understand whether shows should be recommissioned. Are people giving up on it? Is it worth it? Or are we seeing people stick with it because it's a really high quality piece of show? And we might see in our data, and we do often see in our data, shows that perhaps don't feature in this top 30 chart, that aren't performing quite as well generally, that also have very high completion rate because they actually are high quality and they bring people in and they bring people through the series. So it's a really good measure to understand how engaging that piece of content is. And the same thing can be said for this metric here, which is view through rate. So it's not quite series completion because we don't have multiple episodes. What we're saying is that when somebody starts that movie, how far through the movie do they tend to get? So we can say For Love Hard, it was about 80% of the movies. That's a very strong result. Same for The Marksman. And there are a couple down here that get around 70%. But generally speaking, the performance of these top movies is actually pretty consistent. People coming through and watching around 75 to 80% of the movie. So again, a really, strong performance from those top ones. But Army and the Dead, Boy Called Christmas, still people generally speaking watching through that content as well. So what we're going to do here is we're going to break that down just quickly by quarter as well. And the reason that we want to do that is just to have put a bit more color onto that first initial dip that we saw in the streams. So when we looked at the streams data, we saw that there was an initial dip in Q2 into Q3 of 2021. And this is something that we have observed across a number of different territories. And it's the first time really throughout the last few years of examining this data that we've seen more of a seasonal dip in performance. So for Q2 and Q3, we looked at these top performers, and you can see that we have Snabbercash, which is again a relatively strong performer. Sex Life was a strong performer, but in comparison to Q1 and Q4, the performances were less strong performances than there were. So the likes of Lupin, Bridgerton in Q1 getting over 40% of reach. And then again for Squid Game, Red Notice, Chestnut Man getting over half of all Netflix subscribers to come in and watch them. So we don't have any kind of real standout performers, real headline makers in Q2 and Q3. And it will be really interesting to see whether this trend continues into 2022, whether this is a deliberate approach from Netflix to hold back, perhaps from a marketing point of view, or hold back on kind of the highest quality content into Q1 and Q4, when people are more likely to be spending more time on the services. This is something that perhaps that they're looking to do when content levels are. When less people are in the service, they're looking to just trying to spread the content a little bit more, and then does that provide an opportunity to others in those periods of time when Netflix's new content perhaps isn't as strong? Is there an opportunity there to be producing better content on competitive services? I think it's going to be really interesting to see what other services do in this period of time, in those periods of Q2 and Q3, to try and perhaps draw some people out of Netflix into their own services. And then we have a few final outstanding performances. We've kind of dived deeper into the Nordics at this point to just bring out some data for Denmark, Sweden. We do have Finland cuts as well as Norway cuts. Generally speaking, in the trend analysis, we didn't break it down too much further because we saw a lot of similarities between the trends. When you get into the content analysis, especially the stuff that's created in Sweden or in Denmark, for example, we start to see a big breakdown a bigger change in terms of the performance of the content. So for example, for the Chestnut Man in Denmark, in Q4, there was actually a 78% reach. So we know that in Q4, it got around about 50% for the Nordics, but in Denmark specifically, it was around 80%. And in fact, the Chestnut Man outperformed Squid Game in Q4 for Denmark marginally. So again, we can see that for that particular market, it was incredibly important and incredibly strong performer. And the same can be said for Snabbercash and Young Royals, that performed better in Sweden than they did for the Nordics average. Again, Snabbercash attracting a very high 63% of Swedish Netflix subscribers in Q2 of 2021 as well. So the next slide we're going to look at is slightly different, and we're going to start looking at different types of content. So a lot of the stuff that we've already mentioned, but we're going to flip it and start looking at, again, performance over time. So we're just looking at the 12 months of 2021 here. And what we've got here is two different types of content, where we've got Lupin, Snabbercash, Young Royals, Squid Game, and Chestnut Man as our columns. And then we've also got Superstore and The Office as our dotted line graphs here as well. And what we can see in here is that we've got different kind of peaks in the way that the viewing is happening. And what we're trying to show you here is the different life cycles for different shows. So you can see here, this line for The Office is a really good place to start. So we know that The Office was launched onto the platform in January of 2021. So initially it experienced quite a high performance, over 40% reach. in that month, and it's since come down. So we can see that actually it's bumbling in between around about 10 to 20% of subscribers each month on the platform. Now, that is not necessarily the typical pattern you would see for a Netflix original, for example, for a drama piece of content, for example. And those more typical patterns would be something like this Snabbercash blue column that you see here, where initially there was a big spike in viewing and then it comes down. And by the time you get into kind of August, September, October here, you're getting, what we would call the long tail of viewing. You're not getting high performance levels per month. Instead, what you're actually seeing is a big spike and then it comes down quite dramatically, and it comes down below that office line. And the same thing can be said for Lupin, which is our orange here, where it starts higher and comes down below. And then again, even for Squid Game, you can see that by the time you get into November, Squid Game is actually achieving less monthly reach than The Office. So The Office has the ability to keep bringing people on a regular basis at around 10 to 20%. But you need Squid Game or your Lupins or your Bridgertons, Chestnutmans to bring these viewers in very high volume. And I'm just pointing that out again by just showing two examples isolated here, Lupin and The Office. Lupin's a really interesting case because they released the series in two parts. So they first released the series in January, and then they released a second part, I think a second series in June, which is pretty uncommon. You wouldn't see two series released so soon to each other. And we've since seen other series that they've kind of done a part one and part two. And what this has been able to do is provide with these two of these initial spikes, ultimately, where we're seeing 30 to 35% of viewing happening in that first month, and then it comes down. So it could be something to really keep an eye on as to whether Netflix will continue or expand out this particular approach to releasing content, because what they've been able to do by splitting the series into two parts is still give people the opportunity to kind of work through and binge through a few episodes, but actually they're bringing people in higher volume at two different points in time as well. So that could be an opportunity to try and get them onto different shows, get them to becoming more engaged. So it's an interesting strategic development from Netflix's point of view. The final slide we have here before we move on to the next section is looking at the content that perhaps didn't do quite as well. So we've kind of really focused on the top performing shows to this point, but now what we're looking at saying is, well, let's look at those, still look at big Netflix shows, but what are the ones that perhaps didn't do quite so well in the Nordics when in comparison with other series, with other countries, in UK figs. So we can see what we've done here is we've taken some of the top shows that under index for the Nordics in terms of reach percentage, again, against the UK, France, Italy, Germany, Spain, Nordics average, essentially. So what we have here is shows like Below Zero, Alice in Borderland, Who Killed Sarah, Money Heist, which I think is a really interesting case study, and Tribes of Europe and Fate the Wig Saga here, that, as you can see here with this blue line, don't do as well in the Nordics as they do in the other territories. So you can see, look, for Money Heist, let's take that as a great example, that it gets around 30%, which for many shows would be good, but considering the performance of Money Heist, generally speaking, in the other territories, it's actually comparatively quite low. And again, the same can be said of these other shows. And in most of these cases, you can see one of the potential explanations is that we're looking at non-English language content. So we've already discussed the importance of English language content. All but one of these shows are non-English language, Spanish, Japanese, Polish language content, a German language content here. There is one that is English. This is a particularly interesting case that it just seemed to do better in Europe than it did in the UK or the Nordics. And then the final thing to observe really is that we are seeing it hit down for Nordics, but actually you can see the UK is right there with it. And in many cases, the UK line, which is the light green line, is actually lower. So it's actually getting a worse performance in the UK than it is in getting the Nordics. And again, this is a trend that continued to emerge as we were analyzing this data, is that the Nordics and the UK were very closely aligned in terms of content performance. So in this next section, we're just going to kind of examine that a little bit more closely. So what we have here is we have taken the the top 200 Netflix originals across all of our territories. That's all of the Nordics, UK, France, Italy, Germany, and Spain, the top 200 Netflix originals. And so if they're a Netflix original, we know that they are made available to each of those markets. Netflix have the exclusive international distribution rights for that content. So we can easily compare content performance across these countries. And what we have here is the reach percentage for the UK versus the reach percentage for the Nordics again. And we can see this is the correlation. And this is a pretty strong correlation. What we can see with this number here, which is our R squared value, is that there's around 72%. So at a 72% level, you can explain the variation in the other. So from the performance of something in the UK explains 72% of the variation of the performance in the Nordics. So very closely aligned as a high correlation value in terms of how something performs in the UK for the Nordics. A couple of really interesting areas here is this area on this side, which shows us the types of shows in the Nordics that performed better in the Nordics than they did in the UK. So likes of Young Royal, Snabbercash, and the Chestnut Man, these three obviously keep coming up, but they did much better in the Nordics than the UK. But there isn't really anything in this area here. So there's nothing in this corner where it did significantly better in the UK than it did in the Nordics. So the chances are if something's a strong performer in the UK market, it's also going to do well in the Nordics, and vice versa. If it's a weak performer in the UK, it's not going to do so well in the Nordics. So it's really interesting to pull that comparison and trot and see that and see how directly comparative they are. One stands out here, which is the Cecil Hotel. We do know that the UK market loves a gritty crime drama, so I think that tends to be always a higher performer in the UK than others. But just to explain this and show this in a bit more detail, we've just thrown in Spain as a second kind of overlay of this. And so this is again looking at UK or Spain versus the Nordics, and the green dots are the Spain and the blue dots are still the UK. And you can see here that there actually are a significantly higher proportion of dots in this top left-hand corner. So you have things like Money Heist, which you've already discussed, and then you've got 3 other Spanish language shows here that also performed very well in Spain, but didn't land as well in the Nordics. So you couldn't use Spanish performance as a barometer for Nordic performance anywhere near as much as you could with UK performance. And that is a really interesting trend, and it's something that is the weakest of all of the correlations that we looked at. And generally speaking, that's the case for Spain. Very, very strong on local content, but perhaps slightly less correlation than it has with the other countries. And just to finally put that correlation between the UK and the Nordics into context, we've created the correlation scores here. So you can see this is the 71% or 0.71 that we have here for the UK's and Nordic correlation. But again, you can see here that it's pretty much as high as it gets, aside from the combination of Germany and France and Italy and France. So between Germany, Italy, and France, we actually see similar levels of correlation where there is a high level of performance matching in content. So if people like it in Germany or Italy, chances are they're going to like it in France and vice versa. For Spain, as we've spoken about already, correlation levels just seem to be lower. So it's more independent, perhaps enjoying slightly content that is, locally made as well. And perhaps this is also a function of the fact that there has been a significant push for more Spanish language content on Netflix. But again, in context, we can see that this is not this is a high correlation level, and it's about as high as it gets, really, in terms of how we can kind of see the relationship between two shows. So I think it's really interesting it's one of the most interesting things that's we've been able to observe in this data is how aligned the Nordic market and the UK market in terms of tastes on Netflix. So just some concluding remarks before we finish. We're just going to touch really now on where we're going to go with this. So as Ali's mentioned to begin with, we have established the Nordic market. We now have all this data. All the data that we looked at today was pulled directly from the Soda tool that we provide to all of our Soda clients. You can go in and pull this analysis directly. So that was all pulled from our tool. However, we want to kind of add more to it, and we want to add more to our service. So we're talking a bit more about where and what next for us. So there's three key areas we want to touch on. I'll start with the two on the right-hand side. So ultimately, we want to provide more information and more of a global picture, as Ali mentioned at the beginning. So that involves adding more territories. So I know Ali's already mentioned more European territories, expansion into LATAM and the States. So that's obviously going to allow us for more comparisons like we have done today. And then again, also we want to add more services. So adding more services allows us to get that bigger, more granular global picture of the streaming market. And again, what we're aiming to do is do that all through the same methodology, so we get the high quality of data that we've shown today in the global sense across services and markets, so we can capture as much of the viewing as possible in this way. The final thing on the left-hand side is that we're looking to expand into new ways of analyzing data. So one of the areas that we are already developing is more insights into how content performs in two really key areas. So one of those being subscriber acquisition, and the other of those being in subscriber retention. So what we are doing is we are building models that are going to allow us to look at that data and look at the amazing granular historical data that we have on accounts, and use that to help us understand how content can drive subscribers and retention, because it's not always the strongest performers that are the, in terms of just total viewing levels, that are the strongest performers in terms of bringing people into the platform and also keeping them there. So having the data and having to look at it that way, I think is going to add real value as well to the insights we get in terms of understanding content value to these platforms. Apologies all, Sophia's having some difficulty with the headset she's using. So I just thought I'd conclude things for now. So thank you very, very much for everybody who has joined us today. We hope that you got something out of this as well. If there were any other questions that we weren't able to answer, we will be able to get back to you independently on those as well. So apologies if we weren't able to get back to you on any questions that you asked us. If you do have any others, you have the contact details there on the screen. So feel free to jot them down, send myself an email, or get in touch via the website, and we will do as much as we can to organize answering those questions. Or if anybody's looking for demonstrations of our product, then we're also happy to arrange those as well. So we hope you enjoyed it. We will be doing more and more of these webinars as we go forward. So do look out for more of these via LinkedIn or on the website. And we look forward to seeing you all soon. Thank you very much for joining us today.